Good morning, everyone. I love this parable, this allegory. Swamiji doesn't give the whole story, in fact, hardly at all. And I'm hoping that it'll work, that we'll come back and hear more of it, because there's just so much in it. I realized that this page, this one little page in the Bible, which I actually read, I rarely pull out a Bible anymore, but I did last night. And it's the whole story that we tell every week in our festival, of course, the story of the soul's journey, first away from God and then back. But just in such a short little story, it's so rich. There are so many lessons and parts in this story about how we're drawn out and what we go through when we're away from our home, what that feels like, what we go through, what it means to finally be able to turn around and come back, and just how much God loves us. It's just so touching. I'm sure it's touching for many reasons. I mean, the whole idea of being loved by a father like that, just in a very human way, never mind the whole, and they all lived happily ever after, which is pretty wonderful. A friend of mine sent me an email a few weeks ago. I don't know why he sent it. I never asked. It didn't feel important. I think maybe he just felt compelled in that moment to share something that was very dear to his soul. He's somebody who doesn't speak much. One might not know about an experience like this. He's been on the path for many, many decades. And we never communicated about this after. It just appeared, and that's it. So I'd like to read it to you, because it certainly, I guess because it touched me so much, so I've been waiting for a chance to read it to you. But this is the moment. And it just speaks so deeply about both God's love and our being loved, what it means to feel truly unconditional love in the world. So he wrote to me, Swamiji has been a pure channel of blessing for me for many years. For those of you, if there's anybody new here, Swami Kriyananda was a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, who is an avatar. And Swami Kriyananda really manifested in this world everything that is Ananda. He founded Ananda, he wrote the lessons, he wrote the book that Steve just read from, just on and on, everything that has really helped so many of us find our way on this spiritual path came through Swami Kriyananda. So my friend writes, he's been a pure channel of blessing for me for many years. My last time in his physical presence was a sweet and powerful reminder full of grace. During SRW in 2012, I knelt before him to greet him and to convey my respects. As always before, very guardedly, protecting a self-definition, he meant taking care of a place in his ego that was very fragile. That's what really that means. So very guardedly he knelt, protecting his self-definition. As I rose to move away, a wordless yearning from my soul finally let itself be heard. I mean, he's been there for decades, and for the first time, he found the courage to speak to Swamiji. I exclaimed with unprecedented sincerity and unfettered love, Swamiji, it's so good to see you, to be with you. Those were the words he said. He immediately tightened his grip on my hand, pulled me back down to my knees, and replied with vibrant sincerity and master's love, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming. I was so in love with God and with Swamiji in that moment. As with all others, Swamiji had always wanted only to serve the presence of God in me, but only to the extent that I was willing to receive him, to open my heart to him. I had been so afraid to do so, especially in his presence. By the grace of God and Master, I was finally able to open to Swamiji's love and to give my love to him. Truly, the last chance of a lifetime. Such a blessing. Is that not beautiful? For those of you who don't know, Swami Kriyananda then passed early in the following year. So this whole courage that he found, this willingness to face that which was having him stay in this place of being self-protected, just took on that much more meaning, because it really was his last chance, as he said. And Swamiji instantly showed up right where he was. As my friend said, as willing as I was to receive him, he appeared. The story of the prodigal son, well, it starts in the Bible by telling us the story of a wealthy farmer who had 2 sons. And the younger son comes to him one day and tells his father he wants his inheritance right now. He doesn't see himself being a farmer. He's not meant to be on the farm. He wants to take his inheritance and go to a foreign land and use his money now. So the father obliges him and gives him his money, and the son takes off to a foreign land. Now, we now know, I just wanted to find, as we go along, all of the words that the Bible uses. A foreign land means a place that is foreign to the soul. That's what it's talking about. And that's exactly where the son went. He was drawn by his desire for sense pleasures out into this land where he lives what the Bible says, of this Bible, at least interpretation that I read, he then engaged in riotous living. Swamiji called it loose living. You decide all of what that means, though. He spent a lot of money. He partied a lot. He was a kid. That's what kids do. They party. That's what he wanted to do. I have money. I'm going to go out. He squandered his inheritance. He spent it all in all of these ways, trying desperately to find joy and happiness, really, by satisfying his sense pleasures, by buying things he wanted, by having relationships he wanted. But alas, he ran out of money, and a great famine came over the land. And what does that mean, a great famine? That means this realization that we are starving for something. He realized or had an experience of starving. The Bible puts it, the story puts it, as a famine. But isn't that what happens when we go into these foreign lands and we squander our inheritance, which is God's love, all of God's love, as I just read, all of these offerings to be loved unconditionally, to be seen as being perfect, but we turn away from it, we travel, we go out into the world, and we try and satisfy our appetites. But alas, there's a famine. There's nothing there. Without God, the son doesn't know this yet, but without God, there can never be a true, deep satisfaction, because it's like we've turned our back on ourselves, on who we really are. We've turned away from the essence of who we are, of all that feeds us, of all that brings us sustenance, and we're looking somewhere else. And we feel a little full for a while, don't we? We get a little happy. We have a great relationship. We get whatever we get in the world. We think that's pretty great. And then we're hungry again. So what do we think mostly? We think if we're hungry, we ought to go out and get more of what we already had. We just keep trying to fill ourselves up. And he looked all over for food and work, and he gets a job finally feeding the swine for another farmer. Now, feeding the swine here means taking care of all of our desires. And guess what? There's a lot of them, the swine, that is, and they're always hungry. They always want more food. That's what pigs do. They eat a lot. And we're out there and we're feeding the swine, meaning taking care of all of our desires, all of our likes, and all of our dislikes. And finally, one day it dawned on him. He was so hungry that he was thinking of wanting to eat the very food he was feeding to the pigs. But it says in the Bible, but no such offer was made to him, meaning the farmer wouldn't even say to him, take some of this. And it came to him that his father was a wealthy farmer, and that if he went home and worked for his father, that he would at least be eating bread and whatever food his father offered the people who worked for him, instead of lusting after the pig's food. So he realizes he needs to begin this journey home. And he leaves the farm and he goes home. And what happens now, we read about here. And it's an extraordinary part of the story. He's on his way home rehearsing how he's going to explain to his father, who of course represents God in this story, that he's been horrible, that he's undeserving, that he hasn't behaved well, that he's made every bad choice. I don't deserve to be your son. Let me just be your servant. Let me just work for you and just give me some bread and water and I'll be happy. Which is, in many instances, what we do. We spend a lot of time telling ourselves how bad we are, how wrong we are, how we're not meeting our goals. We're certainly not meeting God's goals for us. And in a way, that very telling ourselves over and over, the worst part of this story is that it has us not being willing to look at God. You know, we sing this song every week in the festival, long we feared to face your love, lest our emptiness it prove. Those are very deep words. A lot of what keeps us away from our search for the divine is our own shame. We live with enormous shame, and we're too ashamed to go home. But what does the father do? The father sees his son coming from afar, and now we've been told this. He doesn't wait for his son to come. He doesn't wait for an apology. He doesn't wait to see how much humility the son will show. He goes running to the son. He reaches out to him as he's on his way, and he's yelling behind him to all the people in the farm, get a great robe, get sandals, put a ring on him, kill the best calf. My son was dead, and now he's alive. He had turned his back on all of these spiritual teachings, but look, he's come back, and he embraces his son, even as his son is resisting him, saying, I don't think you see what just happened. I've been horrible. And the father just will hear none of it. Now, the other part of this story that I want to make clear is that this is our story. This is all of our story, no matter where we are right now. Really, we're all still prodigal in some ways, because in a way, you're either the son of God, not just in intent, but in realization. You've made it to self-realization, or you're prodigal. you're still away. But Swamiji has a wonderful analogy for this. He says there's a diamond and there's a piece of coal. The diamond can reflect all the light that comes to it. The coal can reflect nothing. But that piece of coal, just with the right kind of pressure, turns into a diamond. So this is not a difficult role that we're in, being prodigal and on our way. We're on our way to something really extraordinary. But what's happened with this son? This is the whole story of our path. I don't mean just our path, but of the path of yoga. This whole story is of Sankhya philosophy until Patanjali says, and now we come to the practice of yoga. Because until we get ready to actually dive into all of the teachings of yoga, which show us how to remember who we are, how to get to that place where we turn around and we, unlike the son, come running home. What was I thinking all of these lifetimes? I've tried everything. I've spent every penny I had. I've tried every pleasure in the world. And in the end, I am once again bereft and miserable, one way or another. I am getting on this path of yoga. It's exactly what we're taught. And now we come to the study of the practice of yoga. And now I am turning around and I am heading home as fast as I can, that son said. You know, this morning I got up at some ungodly hour because I wanted to listen to or watch Jyotish and Devi, who were in India. So they were speaking at 5:30 tonight, but it happens to be 4 o'clock in the morning our time. And so I figured, I'll just put them on, help me attune myself to these teachings in the best possible way. Jyotish gets up, and the first story he tells a story about Anandamoy Ma, who was a great saint in India. She died about 25 years ago. And he met her on a couple of occasions. And he said that Anandamoy Ma used to say, joy is the food for our soul. There is no other way to feed the soul. But she said, but don't stop people when they're out in the world doing good work, getting good jobs, becoming CEOs, she said. She said, because they're starving. They're starving. And this is the only way they know to feed themselves. The they is we, of course. But isn't that just an amazing, that's what he started with. The soul's journey, we're hungry, we feed ourselves in any way that we can. Now, here's the thing. God never forgets who we are. God is not surprised by our delusions. He's not surprised that we want to run out and party a little bit, that we want to act out against him and have fun. He created delusion. In fact, he created the quintessential delusion. Why would he be surprised? He's only happy when we come back. There's that wonderful story in Autobiography of a Yogi. I want to read part of it to you because Master tells this story. There's no way to paraphrase it. Here is Yogananda living with an avatar, and he's trying to convince him to give him his blessing to send him into the Himalayas so that he can, as he says, please permit me to go to the Himalayas. I hope in unbroken solitude to achieve continuous divine communion. Now, hear this as our story. He's with an avatar who could, in a moment, give him the experience of samadhi. But he says, send me away where I can sit in the Himalaya and find it. He said, I actually once addressed these ungrateful words to my master. Seized by one of the unpredictable delusions, this is Yogananda speaking, which occasionally assail the devotee, I would say a little more than occasionally, I felt a growing impatience with the hermitage duties and college studies. He says, of feebly extenuating circumstances that my proposal was made when I had only been 6 months in his company. He's saying, I'm just not going to defend myself here, but I had only known him 6 months. So Sri Yukteswar says to him, many yeomen live in the Himalayas, yet possess no God perception. My guru's answer came slowly and simply. Wisdom is better sought from a man of realization than from an inert mountain. And it's just like the story. Why are you going out into the world looking for what's right here, right inside of you all the time? Ignoring Master's plain hint that he and not a hill was my teacher, I repeated my plea. Sri Yukteswar vouchsafed no reply. I took his silence for consent, a precarious interpretation, readily accepted at one's convenience. This is what we do. This is who we are. Oh, he's not telling me not to go? Okay, I'll just take off. I'll take off from this divine presence. Now, Yogananda, of course, has a journey in the Himalaya. The last saint he meets says to him, you're not ready for samadhi, when he asks for samadhi. Furthermore, you are living with an enlightened being, and that is who should give you this experience. Now, what is the beautiful part of this story? I'm here, Guruji. My shamefacedness spoke more eloquent for me, meaning he walked in, he felt horribly ashamed. It had dawned on him, if I go home to my father, I'll find what I'm looking for. And what does Sri Yukteswar says? He says, let's go to the kitchen and have something to eat. He's been gone all this time. And Yogananda says, Master, I must have disappointed you by my abrupt departure from my duties here. I thought you might be angry. What does Sri Yukteswar say? No, of course not. He says, wrath springs only from thwarted desires. I do not expect anything from others, so their actions cannot be in opposition to wishes of mine. He goes on to say, all I ever want for you is what is good for you, is what is right for you. God loves us no matter what we're doing. We concoct these stories like the son did. I've been terrible, I'm undeserving. And we live in those terms, even when we're ready to come back, even when now we're ready to practice yoga, even when we realize, as the festival says, repeatedly we lost everything we've had. We come back, but we're so afraid that God won't love us. But of course he loves us. He comes running out to us. He stretches his hand out to give us things. What are those things in our life? Those are those little moments of miracles, of sudden inspiration, of knowing, of feeling a love that is so deep that you can't imagine that it's anything but divine. It's there all the time for us, as soon as we turn to it. There's a wonderful story that I heard recently, but I don't know where I heard it or read it, about a woman an Italian woman who went down to the south of Italy to do an offering to the Madonna that happened in this little town every year on the same date. And she went down there, they carry a statue of the Madonna through town, and then they put her on her place in this temple. And when she was sitting there meditating in front of this statue of the Madonna came to her, just walked right out of the statue, and said to her, I have a work for you to do. I think this woman told Jyotish and Devi this story. I mean, this is a true story. And she said, you're the only one who's come to this church to see me today. I have a work for you to do. And the woman said to her, what are you talking about? There's 500 people in this church. And Madonna said to her, only you came to see me. They all came to be seen. Only you. The Madonna didn't say this now. That was the end of her words. But what does that mean? You came seeking God again. You came looking to find me. Very much like what we heard with this story of moral vigor. We step out, and God's right there, over and over and over. It's proved in our life. I'm going to tell you one quick little funny story before. I don't know how it got to be 11 o'clock already. But anyway, I'm going to have to end in a few minutes. But this was told like it was a true story. I don't know. It just reminded me when I gave that image again of God reaching his hand out. A father was in church with his son, and the minister was telling this story about the prodigal son. And he gets to the point in the story where he says, and God sees his son coming. Remember, the son has been out there sinning and sinning and sinning, I'm sure by church standards, and not learning lessons as we would have it. And he said, and the father stood up and went running to his son with his hand outstretched. And do you know what he said to his son? And the boy turns around and looks at his father and says, "You're grounded." That's not what God says to us, though. Never. He never grounds us. He always says, look, my child has been dead, and now they're alive. Bring everything that I can bring to you. When my friend could finally find the courage to say to Swamiji, Swamiji, it's wonderful being here with you. What a simple statement. Swamiji just grabbed him and brought him, which was the defining moment of my friend's life. That's why he wrote me that letter. He was just bursting with it, just bursting with the love of God after all those years of staying like this, because he didn't have the courage to say, you are what I need. Instead, this is not about him now, not about him. He's actually a very beautiful soul and high being. Of course, we all are. We're all on this path. We're all on a spiritual path, whatever we call it. But how long will we keep looking in the world to satisfy ourselves with these petty little prizes that we get? A relationship here, of whatever it is, a house. I mean, it doesn't matter. We say the same things all the time. The instant we turn around, every richness in the world is there for us. Everyone. Yesterday we had a Q&A for our Raja Yoga class. And we were all here in a big circle. And it was 3 hours. You know, we were worried nobody would have any questions. But the questions came, good questions, extraordinary questions. And even everybody in the class was answering each other's questions from a very high place. And 3 hours we sat there, and I was looking around that room, and I just said to myself, what have I done to be blessed like this? What has everybody in this room? It was such an uplifting, God-loving, mind-blowing, soul-opening time. Every question, every exploration. What brought half of the room were people who have never been to anything Ananda or anything really spiritual. They just walked in to take a Raja Yoga class. Why? Because that's what it looks like when God comes into our life. Oh, look at this. I'll just read this book off the shelf. Happens to be AY. I'm driving by and I suddenly see Raja Yoga. What does that mean? I think I'll take the class. That's when God's coming to us and saying, come on home. I'm going to give you this little experience. I'll just touch your heart because I love you and I will never, ever, ever turn my back on you.